When a professor's remarks grew too harsh, an unexpected voice spoke up, leaving the world abuzz. The lecture hall was alive with energy as students shuffled in, some gripping notebooks tightly, others precariously balancing coffee cups. It was just another ordinary Tuesday at Whitmore University, a renowned campus nestled in the heart of Oregon. Inside room 302, a class on cultural criticism was about to commence, led by none other than Professor Eleanor Grayson, a name that inspired both admiration and controversy in equal parts. Famous for her fearless critiques and unfiltered perspectives, Grayson was known for challenging norms, often dissecting societal structures by using public figures as examples. Sitting in the third row, blending seamlessly into the crowd of eager faces, was a young man few would have recognized. Tall and composed, with a quiet demeanor that masked his sharp observational skills, Baron Trump sat unnoticed. He was dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, his head slightly lowered as if trying to deflect attention. Baron's presence there was no coincidence. He had enrolled at the university under an alias, seeking the anonymity that his family's prominence had denied him. What he longed for was a normal life, a chance to think independently, free from the shadow of his last name. As students began settling into their seats, Professor Grayson strode confidently to the podium. Her commanding aura instantly hushed the murmurs in the room. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice crisp and assured. "Today we'll explore the concept of public image, how it's constructed, manipulated, and sometimes weaponized. And yes, we'll use some real-world examples." Baron adjusted his posture slightly, his expression unreadable, though he already sensed the weight of the discussion about to unfold. What came next would shake both the room and him in ways no one could have foreseen. Professor Eleanor Grayson wasn't merely a lecturer. She was a phenomenon. With a doctorate from Stanford and a prolific career in cultural analysis, she had made a name for herself through fearless critiques of societal hypocrisy. Her lectures often went viral, hailed as both brilliant insights and polarizing rants. Her classes were always packed, the promise of intellectual sparks drawing students in droves. Today felt no different. Grayson began her lecture with ease, weaving examples of influential figures into her analysis. Her dissection of the disparity between public personas and hidden realities was both sharp and mesmerizing. Yet soon, her tone shifted, and a name surfaced that instantly caught Baron's attention. "Take Melania Trump, for instance," she said, pacing the stage with the confidence of someone entirely in control. "A woman celebrated for her elegance and poise. But what does that say about us as a society? Are we so superficial that beauty and silence become virtues worthy of praise?" A murmur spread through the room. Some students nodded in agreement, while others exchanged uneasy glances. Baron felt a faint tension build in his chest, but kept his expression neutral. Grayson pressed on, her voice now edged with sarcasm. "And what about intelligence? Contribution? Influence through substance rather than surface? Is that really the standard we want to set for young women today?" Baron kept his gaze fixed on the desk, his mind racing. He had come to this lecture out of a genuine curiosity for academia and intellectual debate, but now unease crept over him. It wasn't that he entirely disagreed with the idea, but the way it was framed felt deeply personal. Around him, his classmates seemed captivated, some even chuckling at Professor Grayson's sharp remarks. She had a talent for making her words sound like undeniable truths, and the room hung on her every critique. But for Baron, this wasn't merely an academic exercise. It was a challenge. A line had been crossed, and he wasn't sure if he could just let it pass. Grayson didn't stop there. She returned to dissecting Melania Trump, analyzing everything from her choice of words during public appearances to the infamous jacket that declared, "I really don't care, do you?" Students leaned in, fully engrossed in her biting commentary. "She's a symbol," Grayson declared, her gestures deliberate and emphatic. But a symbol of what? A bygone era, where women were expected to stand silently behind powerful men, to smile, look pretty, and contribute nothing of substance. Laughter rippled through the room, accompanied by murmurs of agreement. The atmosphere grew electric as Grayson's critique intensified. "Isn't it fascinating," she continued, her tone laced with mockery, "how we so often confuse quietness with grace, and compliance with class? What kind of message are we sending to the next generation?" Beneath the desk, Barron's hands curled into fists. This wasn't just an intellectual critique. It was a direct attack on his mother. For years, Barron had seen Melania face relentless judgment and ridicule. People focused only on her image, her modeling past, her accent, and used them as easy targets for their assumptions. To Barron, however, she was so much more. An intelligent, fiercely private woman who had quietly protected her family with unwavering strength. Grayson's words felt like a personal affront, not just to his mother, but to the values she embodied. "And what if," Grayson continued, her voice dripping with disdain, "we chose to celebrate women who actually make a difference, rather than those who simply wear designer gowns?" This time, the class erupted in laughter. A sharp pang tightened in Barron's chest. He scanned his peers' faces, some amused, others indifferent, but no one seemed to question the argument's one-sidedness. Yet he stayed silent, at least for now. He wasn't sure if it was fear, respect for the professor, or the knowledge that his family name would be unwelcome in this environment. But deep within him, a small spark of resolve began to ignite. Grayson continued, her tone growing sharper as her critique became even more cutting. "Let's not forget the irony," she said, her faint smirk cutting through the air. "A woman whose public statements are sparse, but include gems like 'Be Best,' a slogan so awkwardly phrased it makes you wonder, does it reflect a lack of understanding or a lack of care?" The laughter was louder this time, echoing off the lecture hall walls. Barron's face flushed, his heart pounding in his chest. But this wasn't anger. It was something far more complicated. Disappointment. Frustration. The realization that, for all her intelligence, Professor Grayson was using her platform to humiliate someone who wasn't even present to defend themselves. Barron's mind raced, recalling the lessons his parents had always emphasized. Stay composed, avoid escalation, and let your actions speak louder than your words. But this wasn't the moment for silence. For years, Barron had kept himself in the shadows, letting his family bear the weight of public scrutiny and even outright hostility. Yet now, sitting in this room, he felt an undeniable responsibility, not just to his mother, but to the principle of fairness itself. Slowly, he took a deep breath, his hands steadying on the desk. Calmly and deliberately, he raised his hand. The movement wasn't rushed or dramatic. It was measured, almost as if time itself had slowed. The professor froze mid-sentence, her sharp eyes narrowing as she spotted him. "Yes," she asked, her tone clipped, betraying her annoyance at the interruption. Firmly, the room fell silent. Every eye turned toward him, curiosity replacing the earlier buzz. No one seemed to recognize him yet, but his presence demanded attention. "I think you're overlooking something crucial," he began, his voice steady and deliberate. There was no anger, no defensiveness, just a quiet confidence that made everyone lean forward, hanging on to his every word. But as Barron continued, it became clear that he wasn't merely defending his mother. He was reframing the entire conversation. Barron's voice resonated throughout the room, unwavering and composed. "You talk about my mother as though she's nothing more than a symbol, a caricature molded by society's expectations. But have you ever stopped to think about the person behind the headlines?" Professor Grayson blinked, visibly caught off guard by the interruption. A few students exchanged curious glances, unsure of what to expect, but Barron pressed on. His tone was calm yet firm. "My mother grew up in a small town in Slovenia, in a family with very little. She worked tirelessly to create a life for herself, navigating a world that judged her for everything. Her accent, her looks, her past. And yet she thrived. She became a successful model, learned 5 languages, and ultimately became the First Lady of the United States. Not because she sought fame or power, but because she believed in her family and her values." A ripple of murmurs moved through the room. Some students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others leaned forward, drawn in by the depth and authenticity of his words. Barron didn't waver, his gaze fixed on Professor Grayson. "You claim she represents outdated ideals," he continued, his voice unwavering, "but maybe the issue isn't her. Maybe it's us, how we, as a society, decide what's worth celebrating. You criticize her for being quiet, but isn't there a certain strength in choosing your words carefully? In speaking only when you truly have something meaningful to say?" The room had grown utterly silent. Barron's words hung heavily in the air, settling over the students like a dense fog. Even Professor Grayson, known for her sharp rebuttals, appeared momentarily stunned. "And let's not pretend," Barron went on, his tone gaining even more conviction, "that public figures like my mother don't pay a price for every single thing they do. Every smile, every gesture, every mistake, scrutinized, mocked, and judged by people who've never walked a day in their shoes. We're quick to tear people down, but slow to consider the toll of living under that microscope." He paused, letting his words sink in. For the first time, the students saw him not just as a fellow classmate, but as someone carrying the weight of experiences most of them couldn't begin to comprehend. But Barron wasn't done. What he said next would challenge not just Professor Grayson, but everyone in the room to see things differently. The room seemed suspended in time, as though everyone had collectively stopped breathing. Then, the faint shuffle of papers broke the stillness, followed by a murmur of whispers. Some students sat frozen, wide-eyed with surprise, while others exchanged glances that ranged from impressed to uneasy. Barron's words had pierced through the noise in a way no one had expected. Even Professor Grayson, typically quick to regain control, hesitated. For a fleeting moment, her confidence faltered before she collected herself. "Those are compelling points," she acknowledged, her tone measured, though it carried a hint of defensiveness. "But—" Their own questions, but her usual air of certainty seemed to have softened. She glanced toward Barron as he exited the room, her expression unreadable, perhaps even contemplative. For the first time, it seemed, her own approach had been challenged in a way she couldn't easily dismiss. Barron walked through the hallways of Whitmore University, his steps steady yet unhurried. The murmurs of students lingered around him, voices filled with curiosity, admiration, and a hint of disbelief. He had come to the lecture seeking insight, but instead he had sparked a dialogue that no one, including himself, had anticipated. In that moment, Barron Trump wasn't just another student blending into the crowd. He was a reminder that sometimes the quietest voices can carry the most weight. Questions trickled in from students, but even Professor Grayson seemed less certain of herself as she left the lecture hall. Her usual confidence was replaced by a contemplative expression, as though the events of the day had left a profound mark. The impact of that moment didn't stop at the classroom doors. Later that afternoon, snippets of the exchange began circulating on social media. A student had captured part of Barron's response and posted it online with the caption, "When the quietest person in the room changes everything." Within hours, the clip gained traction, sparking passionate debates in comment sections about respect, public perception, and the power of standing up for your beliefs. Across campus, discussions erupted about what had unfolded. Was Professor Grayson too harsh? Was Barron justified in standing up for his mother? For the first time in a long while, the focus wasn't on gossip or trivial matters. It was on values, judgment, and what it truly means to see humanity in others. Professor Grayson, known for her unyielding approach, found herself replaying Barron's words in her mind long after the lecture. That evening, as she prepared her notes for the next class, she paused. Something about her usual method felt hollow now. For all her sharp critiques of public figures, she realized she had overlooked a simple truth. Compassion isn't a weakness, it's a strength. But this was just the beginning. What started as a single moment in a lecture hall was about to ripple far beyond the walls of Whitmore University. A week later, the same lecture hall buzzed with energy once more, though the mood was markedly different. Students arrived early, filling seats and whispering about the confrontation that had shaken the room. When Professor Grayson stepped to the podium, her commanding presence carried a hint of humility. "Last week, something extraordinary happened here," she began, her voice steady yet reflective. "I was challenged in a way that made me reconsider not just my arguments but my approach to teaching. And for that, I owe all of you, especially one of you, my gratitude." She glanced briefly at Barron. The room was silent, every student hanging on her words. "Criticism is vital," she continued, "but so is understanding. We can't truly analyze or challenge societal norms without empathy. Last week, I failed to extend that empathy to the subject of my critique. For that, I apologize." Barron, seated in his usual spot, offered a slight nod of acknowledgement. He didn't need or want a grand gesture. The shift in tone was enough. The events of that day didn't end in the classroom. They ignited a broader discussion across campus about how to engage with ideas, public figures, and each other. Students began questioning not just the subjects of their debates, but the way they approached them. On social media, conversations blossomed about fairness and respect, even when offering criticism. For Barron, life returned to its usual rhythm. He quietly focused on his studies, avoiding the spotlight as much as he could. But the mark he left was undeniable. Without intending to, he had delivered a lesson far more impactful than any lecture, a lesson on standing up for what you believe in, not with hostility but with grace and conviction. This story carried a profound moral. In a world quick to judge and slow to understand, it takes courage to advocate for fairness and humanity. Respect doesn't weaken critical thought, it enhances it. It reminds us that even in disagreement, we can choose compassion over mockery. As the semester progressed, the students who witnessed that moment carried its message forward. The ripple effect continued to spread, reaching far beyond Whitmore University. So, the next time you find yourself ready to pass judgment, pause and reflect. Are you challenging the idea, or are you tearing down the person? If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thought-provoking content. Let's keep the conversation alive.